Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and our worldwide audience. We're live streaming this across the country and hopefully across the world. My name is Stan Bauer. I'm the Senior Area Director of Dallas-Fort Worth for the worldwide web people. That's why we wear cowboy hats and boots down here in Texas. So I'm glad you all are tuning in, so you're in for a treat. So first, a couple things for you. This is with CBMC DFW. And CBMC stands for Connecting Businessmen to Christ. And this particular organization has been doing this for 91 years. And that's a little older than me, but I'm getting close. We're doing today a thing called the Confluence. And the Confluence has a couple of meanings by Webster's Dictionary. One meaning a merging or two or three rivers to come together, and you have all these rapids and everything, and then it smooths out 10 to 20 miles down further on. So the confluence is also a gathering. It's a gathering of men, and our focus is on men. And we're looking for men to become the leaders that God wants them to be. Not overbearing and controlling, but kind, compassionate men with a purpose. That's what we work on. And we gather together at a meeting called a Confluence where I or my buddy Phil Carlson will interview people and ask them questions that are hopefully penetrating and informative for businessmen and the community across the world. And one of the things we may end up talking about today is genocide and the rhetoric of genocide, which is a book that Dr. Ben Voth wrote. It's right there. It's rather interesting. So if you slide to the next slide for me, please. You see with CBMC, there's a threefold purpose, mission, and vision. Our purpose is for each man to have an intimate relationship with Christ. And that is a personal, intimate relationship. Because you can't get into heaven without knowing Jesus. And if you know him, you have a relationship with him, that's your free pass into heaven. So we work on that. And part of the vision is that every man will become a disciple maker. And that means, it follows up with the Great Commission in Matthew 18, 19, 20. He says, "Go ye therefore into the world and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, and lo, I'm with you to the ends of the earth." So discipleship is really a one-on-one relationship. It's not a Facebook relationship or an Instagram or stuff like that. You sit down, you look at the man, you see the color of his eyes, and figure out what he's thinking about, what he's given his life to. And we want to replicate this mission throughout the whole world. And we can get it done in one generation if everybody does his part. It's a rather phenomenal concept of doing this, but it starts with a biblical understanding of it. The next thing we talk about is with Phil Carlson, who's not here. He's sick today. And I'll take this hat off so you might be able to see my eyes. Phil is my associate, works with me. We're partners in crime for the Lord Jesus. It's a lot of fun. And he heads up our young professional group. So if you're 40 or younger, unlike my buddy Steve, you can join this group, or even if you are older, and we do a small men's group study on different topics, business principles, what the scripture has to say with it. And a businessman comes in and shares his life over a period of an hour or so, asks him penetrating questions, and how and why he became successful in certain capacities of his life. And it's called the Young Professionals Group. And Phil heads that up. The next group we started is a trusted advisor group for guys a little bit older like Steve. And you'll pay a nice fee to be part of this group. These are CFOs, CEOs, and CIOs that run companies that have similar problems. Because an online worker doesn't have the same problem as the president of a company. It's just different strokes for different folks at different levels, which is, to quote an old TV show that we had a long time ago. And this is our first announcement about our prayer breakfast in October 11th. We have attorney Tim Philpott, who's an author. He's written 3 books, state senator, judge, 2 books. He's one of the most brilliant men I've ever met. He was also the president of CBMC International for years. I've had him speak at different locations that have represented CBMC. Talented, gifted man who loves golf. And he'll be here October 11th. And you will not want to miss hearing and listening to this guy. So our next slide, if you would. You'll see up there CBMC DFW YouTube channel. So all these Confluence, and one today we're recording with Dr. Ben Voth, is up there. And it's all on there. And what our Chase Me Films guy does is he has timestamps for the whole sequence of our keynote speaker, which Dave Arnett, another professor, was doing that. And it really breaks it up. So if you listen to him say, I just wanted to listen at 45 minutes and 20 seconds, success does not satisfy, Christ does. You can actually go to that section, just listen to that conversation. So it really will save you time as we've done chapters on it. And some of you guys out here in the worldwide viewing area, you need to review some of these things and see what some of these men are saying, because it's rather profound. Now, you guys that are here and on the live streaming, there's a QR code on that deal. So if you do that, take a picture, download your information if I met you the first time or the 10th time. So I make sure I know who you are, put a face with you, and we'll connect with you. And of course, I don't sell these names. I don't sell that stuff because, I'm the marketing guy. We don't do that. So we don't do it. So anyway. Next one, we have the Trust Advisory Forums. Already talked about that. And now, Dr. Ben Voth, okay? There's a good picture of him. He's a tenured professor at SMU. He's professor of rhetoric and director of debate and speech at SMU. Rather interesting, I think. He's written a total of 5 books. The 5th one's coming out. He's got 3 of them here. They're $20 a piece. And so what I'm going to do is look at a little bit on Chapter 6, the rhetoric of genocide, and ask this guy some questions. And we're going to sort of try to tear it up a little bit. So, and at 1 o'clock, we're going to have a Q&A from you guys on the floor. I want you to ask questions, okay? Don't be bashful. Stand up and ask the right kind of question. And he'll develop a lot of rhetoric with you and argue you back to the Dark Ages. So he'll do that. So please welcome Dr. Ben Voth, my honored guest. Well, Dr. Ben, you ready?
I think so. I don't know if I can be ready for Stan Bauer, but
well, tell us a little bit about you personally, who you are, and how you got to Dallas and be a tenured professor. So give us a few minutes on that.
Oh, sure. So I actually attended Baylor University after growing up here. Yeah, I see a Baylor Bear right there. When I grew up in Richardson, Texas here. And my original plan was I was going to be a Southern Baptist preacher. I was getting my communication degree so that I would be able to preach more effectively. I also joined the debate team while I was at Baylor. Baylor has actually a really great debate team. And what I found in the debate team was, to be honest, a lot of antagonism toward my own faith. There were a lot of skeptics and agnostics who were really challenging me. And even culturally, debate was sort of abrasive. And I felt like as an undergraduate, God was calling me to have a Christian ministry within academia, and particularly to be a Christian light within the debate community nationally. And so instead of going to Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, I turned my attention to getting a doctorate at the University of Kansas, starting in 1990. That's where you go to sort of become a debate coach. That's kind of where...
A doctorate in what?
In communication studies. With a specialization in argumentation and things like that. And so I was helping coach the debate team at Kansas. And then in 1994, I took my first job as a director of debate at Miami University in Ohio. I also, as I was kind of transitioning to that, I met my wife, Kelly, and we got married in 1990, right before I kind of embarked on that journey. We have 3 daughters. We actually live out in the Rockwall area on Lake Ray Hubbard. But I worked for 14 years at Miami University in Ohio, and I got an incredible phone call in 2008 from SMU saying, name your price, we have to have you here at SMU. And for me, that kind of looked like an opportunity to come home, because I grew up here in the Dallas area. And I really wanted to honestly sort of challenge SMU to live up to its Methodist and Christian roots. And so part of my price was I had to come with tenure, and I've come in a pretty tough way to say, like, hey, even as a Baptist, like, there's some really interesting Methodist history to a lot of these questions that I'm looking at, and trying to help invigorate the Methodist and Christian perspective at SMU. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I get to do a lot of publishing and writing and talking to folks like you, and it's been an incredible ministry, blessed by God. So I'm happy to talk to y'all about it this afternoon.
Okay, that's what we'll do. So give us a little more depth on, to make the decision to become the Christian in academia. Give me a few more sentences on that, Because that's a tough industry.
Yeah, no, I think most people understand that there is, to be very frank, a problem in higher education that involves hostility to Christianity. And to be very blunt, and I didn't realize this at the time, it was probably God's providential understanding, but when you ask, like, what's my doctorate in, it's in communication study. If you study the various disciplines of academia, the one that is most empirically measured as being ideologically skewed is my discipline. And in fact, in a study that was done in 2018, they couldn't find a single registered, and I'm not going to be hyper-partisan here, but the party that you would expect, there was not a single one. All of the professors were registered to one political party, okay? That is actually indicative of a larger ideological problem within our society, that where the control of language, our communication, is the critical problem that's going on in our society. And so probably decades ago, something very deliberately was attempted to sort of have a way to control the language. And so this decision that I made to kind of be a Christian light is a very difficult one that involves a lot of powerful interest, I would say, like that nationally, and in the way that we receive education today. There are a lot of challenges that I think the Christian community needs to rise up to. I love Baylor, and my daughter just graduated from Baylor in 2018, but to give an illustration of this question, when I was a grad student for Baylor in 1990, students in the public speaking class were not allowed to give speeches in favor of Christianity. That's at Baylor, okay? Now, I think a lot of people shake their head like, they can't hardly believe it when I say that, but that's how, yeah, in 1990, that's how it was. And then when I went to University of Kansas, most of the grad students teaching public speaking also wanted to invoke that rule. They actually brought the university attorney in, like in 1992, to say, hey, you can't do that. But I would say a good number of my colleagues did do that. They did forbid students in a, where we would think freedom of speech and freedom of religion, that kind of thing has gone on, and I'm talking to you about things that happened 30 years ago. They haven't really gotten better. And so even the process of me becoming tenured and promoted at SMU are actually very contested issues that have to do with, are we going to actually stand for Christian truth in the United States or not?
So what we want to do, part of this, is I think the thing we talked about with you is you to find your voice as a businessman. Wasn't that it, finding your voice?
Yes.
And your voice to argue the positions from a biblical perspective to people in the community, to make an argument without yelling and screaming. Does that make sense to you? To speak articulately, which I don't as well as he, or I'm not as well thought out. But that's what we have to do and begin to do it, to find a voice where you are. So let me ask this other question, sort of a broad question. What is the connection between your teaching and research mission and your Christian convictions?
Yeah, so in the process of being a professor, you have to develop a statement on teaching and research. And my statement is actually very simple, is to equip individuals to have their voice. And that's what Stan was actually alluding to even in phrasing that question. What's interesting about that, and I explained this to students at SMU, I did this past week. On the first day of every class, doesn't matter what I'm teaching, I explain the answer to this question. There's actually a bench on the SMU campus that has engraved into the stone Matthew 5:16, which says, "Let your light so shine before men that in seeing your good works they glorify your Father who's in heaven." And I tell the students, my purpose here at SMU is to equip you to have your voice, all right? That is derived from Matthew 5:16. A part of your light, and I would say that for all the men here and even a couple of women that we have here, there's a unique light that you have, which is your ability to express your ideas and to communicate. And for the SMU students, I'm saying, I'm here to make sure that happens. And it was a student who actually pointed out to me that if you look at that verse, from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, it says "your" 3 times. It doesn't say, "Let Ben Voth's light," or "Let SMU's light," or "Let your parents' light," or "Let your business's light." It says "your light." And so I believe that every individual is made in the image of God to uniquely express themselves and their ideas. And honestly, there's potential even in this room that is unrealized in terms of not living up to the ability to communicate. And so my teaching and research is designed to help every person do that. And I even tell my secular students at SMU, look, even if you don't believe that, if you sort of falter and you're hopeless, I still believe in you because I actually think God made you to do something. You know, and I've never, in 15 years of being at SMU, no student has ever challenged that. They're always encouraged to hear that, like, oh, you're totally for me and trying to help me develop my individual abilities. And I think for all of you here, like, there is still untapped potential to communicate better, and it's really critical to actually God's purpose in your life. And so that's what I'm doing.
Talking about this, now these are business guys. So the debits and credits and CEO guys and salesmen and IT guys and stuff like this. And CBMC, we support the American businessman. That's what we do. Because you guys out there and in the worldwide web, wherever you are out there, all your money goes to support worldwide missionaries, locally, nationally, internationally. You guys control the money by how God provides to you to disperse the funding for ministries of CBMC, whatever it is, your church, whatever. So how does the Christian conviction relate to the effectiveness of being a businessman and making the argument to sell their product or to sell it ethically? I mean, how do you tie those two together? These are business guys. Help them rethink
this is an interesting question. And, you know, there is a slide, and I kind of saw it pop up there.
Which one is it? Tell them which one you want.
The one about Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor quote, yeah. So,
there it is.
There it is. And so this training that I did with Holocaust survivors in 2006 and 2007 really affected me and my perspective on how to help everyone, including businessmen, be better communicators. You can see Elie Wiesel, famous Holocaust survivor, said, what hurts the victim most is not the physical cruelty of the oppressor, but the silence of the bystander. Okay, and that's a very profound reality to sort of think about in terms of like what enabled the Nazis to do what they did in the genocide of the Holocaust. But to bring it home to businessmen, I do a lot of consulting here in Dallas where I do exactly what you're saying. One of the jobs I did actually was for Baylor Hospital here in Dallas. I don't know if any of you work for them. And strangely, I was telling them to try to answer your question, like, hey, I'm going to bring this quote from Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel. I'm going to apply this to your surgeons and nurses. And they're like, Professor Voth, I don't think that's going to really work or make any sense. And I'm like, no, it's going to be okay. I was up on a stage kind of like this. There were probably like 100 mixture of surgeons and nurses in front of me probably about 5 years ago. And I said, how often does it happen in a surgical operating setting that the surgeon makes a mistake, the nurse sees it, but she doesn't say anything to the surgeon about the mistake?
Every day.
And as soon as I said that, the surgeon's eyes got like about that big, and the nurses started nodding in that room. And those surgeons came to me in a panic after it was over, like, what do I do about that? I said, well, every person has to be equipped to have their voice. There are businesses that are not as effective because there are people holding back and they're thinking, I don't have something to contribute. Okay, and Christianity has the unique power to help you understand that you have potential that is untapped. And your organization is not being as effective when you don't communicate. I mean, I work for the city of Plano quite often, almost every year here, and I'm saying there are people in your organization that are not speaking, and you're not getting the benefit of that information and that insight to do better. So when we don't take this seriously, like literally, which actually Jesus was teaching us, we're hindering the effectiveness of our organizations and sales and all those things that are, you know, the nitty-gritty spreadsheet things that we're asked about. Those are being unrealized because we're not doing this.
Well, I think it's right because in business world and in the ministry side of it, a lot of business guys, and you can't speak to people frankly and honestly because they get offended at the drop of a hat. And the HR people hold you in contempt by a policy that has nothing to do with Christian methodology of forgiveness, for instance, but they hold you to a policy that has nothing to do with, if a guy has a problem with me and you come to me and talk, as men, let's iron it out, you know what I mean, and fix it, make it work. Because, you know, I do make mistakes, you know, believe it or not. I just made about 10 this morning. Other than that, it's been a perfect day. But we have to be able to talk about it to one another. And also, can it relate to a husband and wife?
Absolutely. I think that, you know, there's a lot of discussion about marriage, obviously, in the New Testament. But at the bedrock of good marriage is good communication. And so if one spouse is kind of dominating and the other is being silent, that relationship over time is sort of being corroded and hurt. And so the gospel, even in the relationship of Jesus to his bride, the church, is an idea that there's full and wholesome communication that's happening. And so, yeah, marriages, depend upon good communication. And so, yeah, when I do work at Lake Point Church where I attend, I have couples in my class, this comes up, and it's really critical to be able to communicate and not be afraid, even like you said, in a work environment, well, I'm afraid. There are a lot of different reasons why people are afraid. And I'm always trying to raise the courage of individual people. Don't be afraid to tell someone, even though they might be upset, what's hurting you or what you need or what you're concerned about. And I think you're right. Even socially, we've kind of gotten withdrawn. I better not say that. It's going to upset somebody.
And this is why we have to
everything.
We have to find our voice. So this
Yes.
means you're going to have Sunday afternoon lunch with Laura and I. We're going to counsel and sort of get there and work some stuff out. So
Good.
I'm always looking for help.
I'm so happy for Laura.
Yeah, I need the help. She doesn't. So let's talk about this a little bit. This has been rather interesting to me. This is one of his books, The Rhetoric of Genocide. Now, it's interesting. This is chapter 6. It's Christianity is a critical methodology for moral action. And if we stand by as bystanders like that, sit up there, and we have to have moral conviction for moral action in saying wrong is wrong, right is right. And we can talk about women's rights and abortion, genocide, what's happened. So we'll just start off, okay? So you make this statement, I'm just going to quote you. Christianity is the largest popular religion in the world with more than 2 billion adherents. This community of faith has several important avenues relating to the problem of genocide. Prospects for being victim targets of genocide, prospects for rationalizing asserting genocide, and the potential to resist and overcome both of these undesirable outcomes. So we're the largest religion in the world, but our voice is not being heard properly, especially in the genocide moments. Now give us an historical view of genocide that's happened in a couple of countries throughout the world, other than the Nazis and killing all the Jews, so present day.
Yeah. So probably the most contemporary one that I've worked with directly has to do with Rwanda. And so in Rwanda, the Hutus killed a Tutsi minority in 100 days. According to my research, actually more than 1 million Tutsis were killed in 100 days, involving just simple things like machetes and things like that. I do have some colleagues here with me today. Uche is one of them. That just this summer we were working in Nigeria. I do think Christians are being killed in Nigeria. In targeted terrorist killings and things like that. And so, those are a couple. Sudan is another one that I was talking to someone about here earlier, where there have been genocides more recently, like in the last 20 or 30 years. So, and again, the 20th century really was the deadliest human century. 180 million people died in genocide. By comparison, 40 million people, civilians, died in war, which is terrible. But you were 4 times as likely to die from genocide in the 20th century as war. So we do need a better and a stronger intellectual perspective, and that's what that quotation was trying to set up there.
Okay. You read in here the most common convention of academia is to treat Christianity as an object of critical scrutiny, suggesting in most cases that the Christian church facilities pathological assumptions such as capitalism and patriarchy. So what did we say in here?
Okay. To be honest, that's why I think this chapter is the most interesting and pivotal one, chapter 6 of Rhetoric of Genocide. There was tremendous pressure on me not to publish this chapter. Okay, and by the way, these books they're not by a Christian publisher. It's by an academic publisher. That by itself is a miracle, okay? Because the normative way of academics relating to Christianity is, as I say there, is pathological. And by that, that's kind of the high-tech word for y'all are bad. Christians are bad. They're trying to socially regressive, manage society in a bad way. I'm writing the opposite. I'm like, no, Christianity as a thinking process and as a moral action process is good. And I'm not going to name names, but even at SMU, there were very strong pressures. Don't you dare publish that. And I actually had to tell another tenured professor at SMU, was like, hey, you know what? Why don't you publish what you want to publish, and I'll publish what I want to publish. And so this is a confrontation right there in the text with what I was always taught in grad school, you're the bad guy. The Christians are the bad guys. They're the ones that are trying to discriminate and engage in prejudice and oppression. Every alternative is liberating. I'm like, that's not correct, and it's not empirically correct. So that's what I'm setting up there. Look, this is not going to be your regular academic anti-Christian treatment.
Okay. The most severe argument is the public killing of an innocent individual, whether by lynching, crucifixion, burning at the stake, beheading, stoning, and a number of other methods human beings had sadistically devised toward the public kill. Human beings want their fellow community members to feel the sting of death in a way that only removes another individual from its membership, but creates a powerful chill that limits free communication within society. So when we see those hangings of people in Iran, right? Now, talk about that in relationship to what we just said here.
Yeah, the governments of Iran and China actually lead in terms of public executions. I mean, North Korea is also very prominent with that. But that is the way, and there's a really excellent secular book by a guy named E.O. Wilson, who actually recently passed away, an academic who wrote a book called The Social Conquest of the Earth. And he explains that in every human culture, including Iran, China, and others, the thing that really connects humanity is the killing of the innocent. And not just like in a private way, but as a way of demonstration that says, I'm in charge, I'm the authority in the Communist Party of China, or the theocracy that Iran has. Those public hangings in Tehran are designed to terrorize the public and create silence that says, I accept your authority.
So you lose your voice.
Yes.
And Christians in America have lost their voice. Does that make sense? You're afraid to say something, to stand up for the truth. And unless we speak up with the truth that you know about God and apply it to your own life, it's going to happen to us. It's called the old silent majority. Would you say that was true?
Yeah, no, that's a fair characterization of kind of how Americans find themselves.
Well, we got to wake up. And you got to confront issues that people don't want to talk about in a safe environment. So here's another thing I was reading on with it. I'm sort of cherry picking my questions, so you have to forgive me. So this is rather interesting, okay? Public lynchings tell us about the extensive nature of social warrants where a notion of trial to test the proposition to guilt seems incomprehensible. Okay? What is a social warrant?
Okay. So when you're having, like in that example, lynchings, and again, there are American examples, but even actual lynchings ostensibly in Tehran and things like that, a warrant is a very specific term that's in my discipline. It comes from a guy named Stephen Toulmin, who's a British researcher, and he says that when you make an argument, there's three parts. There's data or evidence. Second, there's a claim. And third, there's a warrant.
Hold it. Write this down, guys. And you're making a sales argument to sell your computers, whatever you're doing. This is what you use. James, write this down. Say it again. What are the three components?
Data, a claim, and a warrant. Okay? So for example, if I say, the Dallas Cowboys haven't won the NFC Championship in 30 years, they're probably not going to win it next year. I've given you some data, and I've made a claim. And there's a logic behind that you can recognize that, look, history is a predictor of the future. That's reasonable. Now, if I said, there stands Black Hat, therefore the Cowboys aren't going to win the NFC Championship, you probably would just kind of shake your head like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's illogical. There's no warrant, okay? So societies are constantly building warrants, and some of them are bad, honestly, and they have to do with, these killings, things like that, like in Rwanda, they're like, the Tutsis are bad people. You just can't trust them. That was a social warrant. Now, it was pathological. It was wrong. But people acted upon that. When they got on the radio and started saying, hey, those are cockroaches, people were willing to take machetes and chop up their neighbors because the social warrant was that strong. And that's where, again, the Gospel of John is really important, where John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. The word that he's using in Greek is the same word that Aristotle uses for logic, logos. Jesus is logos. There's a logic to being a Christian that allows us to disrupt pathological warrants that exist in society. And truthfully, I would say that's mainly what's been to the benefit of humanity for the last 2,000 years. And we as Christians have done a poor job of tracking that. There are lots of bad social warrants, but the best social warrant that we can have is a mental commitment to Jesus Christ. That will disrupt Tehran's, bad view, the Communist Party of China's bad view. And I've actually, worked with international individuals who actually directly confront some of these things. I've worked with North Korean dissidents and things like that. But societies build warrants, and then that's how they convince themselves day to day, moment to moment.
So there's a social warrant in Nigeria, we think, a social warrant in Iran that Christians are bad.
Right.
And that warrant is coming to America because we don't believe in abortion. Most Christian men don't, I would say. Well, I'm making a claim I have no basis data. Okay?
Well, we'll work on that.
Okay, so I'm learning not to
We'll work on
argue.
that.
So a personal opinion is wrong, okay? Personal opinion, which I'm not short on that stuff. Now, we have this public slayings of the innocent. Let's talk about abortion. We had to do a genocide in our own portion of it, and give me some data on that.
Okay. Well, and there is actually a whole chapter actually about abortion in this book, and it's very interesting, very shocking to my colleagues. It's called Sex Selection Abortion, okay? And and again, however you feel about that very controversial issue.
This is data, right?
Yeah, this is data here. There's nothing making the world more male every day than abortion, okay? There are about 40 million abortions every year in the world, okay? The majority of those abortions, legal or illegal, however you want to kind of characterize that, they're against female children, okay? Because the social warrant is women are lesser than men. So what happens, especially in India
And that's
and China,
in China, right?
Yeah, in India and China especially, and by the way, this is against the law there, when they have abortions, they choose female children to be aborted. So literally, tens of millions of female children are missing from global society. And most of the United States, by the way, that is also not illegal. Like, in fact, there are cases of people coming to the United States to pursue that because it's illegal in India and China. But China especially has literally skewed its society so male that it's actually very messed up in terms of the potential for marriages and family formation, things like that. And yeah, and the data is absolutely clear. And the ironic thing with India is that they thought between 2001 and 2011 that with more education and money coming to the country, this problem would subside. But they actually found that the more educated and affluent you were, the more you tended to choose an abortion against a female child. Now, that's a real nightmare. Interestingly, probably the country that's been the most successful in resisting that problem in the whole continent of Asia is South Korea. And I can't prove this, but correlationally, Christianity has increased in South Korea quite a bit in the last 30 years. And Christianity's preference for women, its high value for women, affects this bad social warrant about abortion being used as a tool of violence against women before they're born. So, and the thing is, I'm also trying to say to even to my colleagues who think that abortion is okay, it's like, look, you're directly hurting the interest of women because there's literally millions and millions of fewer women every year if we continue to not challenge what abortion as a legal process represents.
So, as I believe, children in the womb are children and viable human beings, yet America has how many abortions every year?
Well, it has been as high as about over 1 million a year.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the good news is, and I've actually...
Have they broken it up on race, ethnic background on that?
Yeah, and there clearly is expressed racial animus, and I talk about that in the book, that Margaret Sanger definitely conceptualized abortion as a tool of racist extermination. In her view, humanity is a garden.
They won't know, some won't know who Martha Sanger is.
She's the founder of Planned Parenthood, which is kind of the main sort of advocate group in the United States for abortion rights. But broadly speaking, even in the 1930s, she thought that the ideal society would be completely white. And that in her words, and she wrote this in a book called Pivot of Civilization, non-white people were weeds that needed to be removed. Birth control, abortion, other tools were, to her organization, a way of removing weeds. It is an inescapable racist fact as to her original argument.
It's
and
truth what you're
functionally,
saying. It's truth because she wrote it in her book.
Right. It's in her book. Textually, it's there. Now, again, academics tend to not like to talk about this. It's a very uncomfortable topic. It's a very popular debate topic. So I've watched these things. And to me, it's clearly there is information that's excluded in academic conversation. This book, it lays it out there. And again, honestly, shocking that the academic press allowed it to kind of come.
So how did we get to the social
warrant?
How do we get a social warrant that abortion's okay? What happened in the 60s? Remember we talked about that yesterday?
Yeah.
And sort of bring it back and how it turned in that society?
Yeah, I mean, I do think, a lot of people ask me, like, how did America kind of get in this difficult position? I do think in the early 1960s, the decisions that the Supreme Court made, for example, to remove prayer in school and Bible reading, I think there was a corrosion to the intellectual process to where we teach people to not understand themselves in a sacred image and that kind of thing. Like if a person is made in the image of God, they have rights that cannot be taken away. And so that has been problematized, I would say, probably for the last 60 years. And it's been a trend. And to be honest, I think every Christian in Christian history has been faced with a dehumanizing evil purpose that the world has. These genocides, I mean, they're out of Satan's, plot.
Right. Well, this
so,
is
yeah.
a genocide to kill people.
Yeah.
And abortion is part of that.
Yes, it is.
And we volitionally do it, right?
Right.
So give us more about how this became a social warrant. So we had Madeline Murrow O'Hare get prayer out of there, take the U.S. Constitution out. So we lost our moral bearings, gentlemen. It's like doing a real estate deal. You have to do it ethically. When you sell something, do it ethically. You don't get greedy. You make a reasonable profit. You don't have to skin the cat, so to speak. Leave some crumbs on the table. Does that make sense to you? You don't take all the chips in, just think about me. Leave some for some other people. Like in the Old Testament, they left the corners of the field that the poor people could glean the grain on the edges of the field. Do you understand? Do you remember that? That's what we need to do in business. Okay? Now, let's go back a little more in the social warrant. How did it become so prevalent that, my rights, my body, yet they tell us when you take the shot, I don't have a right to my body, you got to take it under compulsion. So give me a little background how abortion became a social warrant, that it's okay.
Well, again, I think at the root of these questions is failed education. And again, part of what I'm trying to impress upon all Christians is that we need to take more seriously that Christianity is an intellectual commitment. I mean, it's not simply an emotional commitment. And so we have developed kind of a bifurcated view of education, which is that, okay, there are largely the public school system, and then there's a separate education involving my faith that's in the church. As that has been accentuated, that has allowed pathological arguments to be taught to people over decades and things like that, to where, you have very contradictory arguments. You just pointed them out about, like, the shot versus, my body, my control. These are just power trips that people are taking. Like, for egotistical purposes, they make contrary arguments. And one of the things I'm trying to help people understand, and for Christians especially, is that, and you hear this phrase a lot in academics, like, knowledge is power. And I totally agree with that. But what I don't think Christians are understanding is that, as Acton said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Christianity uniquely challenges the relationship between a person and knowledge to where we have to humbly come to the student to help and not to hurt. But the way education has become largely is an egotistical power trip for the teacher to sort of exert all kinds of contradictory things that we could list off this afternoon, like, why are they teaching that? Why are they teaching that? It's just a power trip.
Well, that's what happens when they get tenured.
Well, yeah. But again, it's a paradox because, like, if I didn't have tenure, like, I'd probably be gone. And so it's a tricky thing, but the truth is that every Christian needs to stand at an intellectual and knowledgeable level against those things that are false. Or as Jesus would say, wise as a serpent. And that's where I think we're falling down, honestly. We're not wise as serpents.
And gentle as a lamb. He sent them out two by two.
I feel like Christians are being gentle, but I don't think we're being educated as to the answers to the questions you're asking.
Well, I need your help with that. So he says, be shrewd as serpents and gentle as doves. And shrewd in the Greek means cautious character. I don't just because an 8-foot boa constrictor won't go after an elephant, he'll go after an antelope, something he can bite-size. Do you understand what I'm saying? We have to be shrewd as snakes in your business and in our community. And I personally don't believe in separation of church and state, because when you get a judge, whatever party he or she is from, they're going to be convicted on their values. And where do their values come from? Does it come from the party or how they're reared? So if you're raised in a very liberal way, you're going to have very liberal views and values. Of course you can have sex outside marriage. Of course you can have abortion. Of course you can have homosexuality. Of course everything's fair game with it. With the Bible, we have certain constraints. So as a conservative judge, you'll speak conservatively, and a liberal, you speak liberally on your convictions. And you guys out there in the workforce and in the world, you have to live by your convictions. But where do you get them? So where did you get your convictions to speak on these hard issues like a rhetoric of genocide and the stuff from James Farmer on segregation, stuff like that?
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because when I started out as an undergraduate, I think I would say, even though I was a Christian, I had some very soft feelings about like these issues of abortion and things like that. But as I got into the debates and started realizing, frankly, the really extreme things that the debate community, the communication community was doing, I adjusted my thinking. Like, no, that does not conform to what the Bible teaches, and I had to adjust my thinking. And in particular, and again brought up the issue of James Farmer. I literally wrote the James Farmer book anticipating, to be honest, the very harsh conflict in this country regarding Black Lives Matter and race questions in the United States. And that book is written, there's a chapter in Rhetoric of Genocide about James Farmer, but almost nobody knows that a Christian man named James Farmer Jr. trained Martin Luther King in all the techniques of nonviolence and civil disobedience that we sort of famously attribute to that movement. And Christianity has played pivotal roles in solving racial problems that the public is largely unaware of. And so I wrote the Farmer book, actually even to help SMU understand, because he was Methodist. He was trained as a Methodist minister. But the reason we don't have segregated water fountains and segregated busing is absolutely singularly because of a Christian vision of this man, James Farmer Jr., born here in Texas, that nobody knows about. And even King says, look, I learned what I did from him, but trying to help Christians understand, you don't have to be fearful of this dialogue about race, because Christians have powerfully contributed to solutions on racism that we're largely unaware of or that we just haven't kept track of. I wrote a very censored article by Google called "America is Structurally Anti-Racist." Now, I put it that way because I knew Google would probably censor it, and they did. It's very hard to find, actually. You have to use Bing or something else. But that article details how Christians in the United States have consistently and effectively fought against racism. And the church ought to be able to articulate that. But even with my own church, I've kind of had to say, look, some of what you're hearing in the way of race dialogue in the United States is completely pathological and dangerous. It's actually trying to incite racial violence rather than reduce it. The original American civil rights movement, as held by men like James Farmer Jr., is very Christian and very successful. And Christians ought to be, dare I say, proud of that and articulating that. So I wrote that in 2017 trying to forestall kind of the things that happened in 2020 that were really ugly in the United States. But I knew from being in a debate that these bad things were coming. So yeah, all of these books are designed to equip, especially young people, to combat, frankly, dangerous ideas that are existing in the academy.
So if you want to make you have to have data, a claim, and a warrant, right? Pick up the book from James Farmer so you can speak articulately about it, okay? I mean, he helped out Martin Luther King. Think about that. Where he got those ideas? So Mr. Farmer discipled Mr. King. That's what we do at CBMC. We disciple other men. So the knowledge you have, Dave Lowe, the other gentleman out there that God's given you, impart to a younger guy. Get off the bench, get in the game, get in the field, World Wide Web out there. Get off the bench, get in the game, and start participating in the game of life, which is critical to the claims of Christianity and what we're trying to do things the right way. Now let's turn to something non-controversial, okay? All right, you're saying this same book you wrote, which is rather good, Looking at the most seminal basis of Christian doctrine, the Bible, it is possible to understand this theological approach as critiquing two important assumptions of human societies. Public killing of the innocent as a social argument, which we talked about a little bit, and the subordination of women as male subjects. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Now, I have a personal, I want to say, Christian view or Bible view, my opinion after reading different things, And there's such a movement as the feminist movement, which I think has destroyed a lot of positions. And I remember reading that remember that newspaper that came out in color? Was it called Today, or what was it? Yeah, it came out. And it was way back when Detroit and everything got shut down, and then the women in the workforce went to 51% for women and 49% for men. This is 30, 40 years ago when it all got laid off. And the women's feminist movements come on. So the subordination of women as male subjects. Now, let's talk about that data and then the claim and then the social warrant on this stuff.
Yeah, so, and again, in the overall picture of global violence, women are disproportionate victims in the way that men typically carry the arms and are in the army and things like that, and then targeting civilians and things like that. So there are all kinds of things that happen to women historically that are gruesome, terrible. Rape is one of the many crimes in the arsenal of violence. But for the Christian, and I don't think Christians are fully grasping this, when you read the Gospels, it's actually shocking that it's relayed to us in first century terms that women were the first witnesses of the resurrection. The very fact that Mary is sort of offered to us as proof that Jesus was resurrected is a shocking narrative portrayal, and one which for all the gospel writers would have been a taboo intellectual move. What they should have done was remove any discussion of Mary finding Jesus resurrected and begin with somebody like Peter, a male. And even today, in legal societies around the world, the testimony of men counts more than women, especially like in Islamic societies and things like that. Like, a woman's voice doesn't matter. But the Gospels uniquely say that the primary evidence for Jesus' resurrection is the account of women.
Now, you said that was a paradigm shift.
Yes.
Now, explain that.
So, up until that point, there's really no place in history where intellectuals would have said, from a position of power, I offer to you women's voices as evidence of some true thing. Only men could testify to what is true. And so the Gospels are actually a shocking critical theory against that male paradigm that existed all the way up into that point of the publication of those accounts. And I've had feminist scholars say to me, okay, yeah, that is just a shocking fact. And again, even some friction at SMU, like that's just a fact. Like, even if you think the Gospels are a farce, it is a very provocative thing that these authors decided to predicate the resurrection, which is the central claim of Christianity, on the voices of women. And that has caused, since that time, the expansion of women's rights globally, and that's primarily the mechanism. I would say women have dignity, and that's why, for example, I said even that very extreme case of sex selection abortion, Korea resists that because as Christianity grows within that culture, women find themselves dignified and worthwhile because that's what they see in the narratives. And I don't think that really shakes or threatens some of the question about like the submission of men and women in marriage and things like that, which many people argue and debate about, but women have a very unique, compelling position in the New Testament and especially in the Gospels.
So what he does say in here, with women and men and this kind of stuff, that it says, it's not the one I'm looking for, it's 21. Make sure I get my quote. And be in marriage, he's talking about be subject to one another in fear of Christ. So Laura and I are subject to one another in fear of Christ. But a different thing comes into play in 1 Corinthians 11:3, where he sets out the pecking order of how the social structure works in the Christian family, which is God the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, man and woman. And that has to do with role playing. Now, the best teaching I had in that was years ago from Pastor Dr. Ed Young, and it came out of Ephesians 5:24, 5:25, that whole thing. And he said that how this works is that men and women are equal value, different function. Does that make sense to you? Equal value, different function. The male brings the seed, she brings the egg. There's different biological roles we get into. So now as a Christian in this warrant that, women who have to break the glass ceiling in this message it's ruined a lot of structures within the American family. And how have you argued for the American family or the traditional American family versus the new one?
I mean, I do think, in Matthew 19, Jesus gets into an intellectual debate about marriage, and it's not surprising that those intellectuals ask him a hard question about marriage, almost kind of like this, and Jesus responds with the language from Genesis that God created them male and female, and for this reason, they will become one flesh. So it's the differences between male and female that are the cause of marriage, and that is what the New Testament, as you're just reading, is explaining. Now, what's paradoxical, and I think we sometimes lose track of this, and revolutionary, is that up until this text happens, all of human society was organized around dominion and subjugation, even slavery. Like, women were property of men in marriage. Now, so when it talks about the issue of submission from a Christian perspective, a man is leading in the way of giving his life for his wife, as Jesus gave his life for the church. That's the wedding marriage metaphor that we are to embrace. So men are not in Christian marriage to dominate a woman in the way of their leadership. They are to serve as Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. That's the kind of leadership that men should exert in marriage. And of course, that is being deconstructed by secular sources in the United States, but the empirical success of the marriage model, it goes beyond even the United States. It is the thriving of human communities and the literal 8 billion people that are on the planet. It wouldn't have happened under the property-sharing system where women are treated as property. Christianity is unique in that very compelling vision for women and marriage.
But Jesus did take women out of being chattel or property and made them of equal value, different function. He was the greatest equalizer of women in the whole world, Jesus Christ. So you guys out there in the world, you need to explore that, what it looks like from a Christian perspective as compared to other ideologies or theologies or whatever you get into. Take a hard look at it. Explore what the Bible has to say about this. Now, we get into, and we talked a little bit yesterday about it, 1 Peter 3, 1 Peter chapter 3, first 6 verses, it says, "In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, even as though they're disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by your chaste behavior," this type of thing. So the first 6 verses, gentlemen, in this 1 Peter deal with women. But what most men forget about as Christians, that Christ picks back up on verse 7 for husbands and sort of comes right down the line on what our part of the responsibility is. It's rather interesting right in there. Now, in your book, and we talked about the subjectation of women, how can we argue a Christian point of view to a world that doesn't accept the Christian worldview, that we don't want women? It says women be subject to your husbands. That's a hard word, and it means a lot. And where Sarai was supposed to call Abraham master and Lord. I mean, that's what she did. And if she didn't obey him, there's no fear of him retaliating against her. And he's clear about that in there. So tell me about the argument you make with this.
So one of the things that motivated me throughout graduate school to handle the problem that you're talking about, I think it's in 1 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5, where Paul is writing the Church of Corinth, obviously, and he's saying that we take every thought captive and make it obedient to Jesus Christ, okay? And so that is what I was trying to do in grad school. And so even when I was talking to feminists who really, at a secular standpoint, did not agree with what we just talked about, I tried to understand, what is your warrant, okay? What is it? And they want women to be dignified. And so then I explain, almost like what you were doing there yourself, is like, look, there's nothing giving more dignity to women than Christianity. And I even got some of my, very secular feminist grad students to come to church with me and said, like, if that were what Christianity is, I would believe it. And I mean, and that's always what I'm espousing and advocating. But I think Jesus did always try to understand, even like the adulterous woman. Now, he didn't fail to say, go and sin no more. Like, he does say that, but he does try to understand before he says that. And I know we're all kind of at bitter ends in our society, but we have to keep patiently seeking the understanding of these secular antagonists, and then understanding that, not compromising the Bible, but rather explaining how this is compelling to the interests that they hold. And that's what I try to do, like on race and on sex and a lot of things that are very controversial. I mean, I deal with controversy like every day in terms of debate.
Right. So I want to switch gears a little bit, okay? Let's go to that last slide, please, Chase. How does your latest book on Wilson, Harding, Coolidge relate to your Christian approach to education? Now, guys, this is fascinating. We talked a little while yesterday about it.
Okay.
Tell about the comparison.
Yeah, so these are three presidents that ruled the United States like about 100 years ago. And I was sort of fascinated by the fact that Woodrow Wilson is reified or sort of lifted up by academia as one of the greatest presidents in the top 10 in the rankings. And Warren Harding, who followed him in 1920, is considered one of the worst. And to be honest, that doesn't make sense, okay? And that's sort of shocking, so I went into a historical investigation that actually involves questions of race and sex that we were just talking about. Here's something you may have never heard. You may be shocked and in disbelief about what I'm about to tell you. In 1920, Warren Harding ran for president, and one of the main arguments for him not being president of the United States was he is not white. Now, you can look at that photo and kind of say to yourself, like, well, what are they saying there? In fact, the N-word was used to describe Harding. And in fact, Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State or Chief of Staff, when he heard the news from major newspapers that Harding was accused of being the N-word, he said, that is great. America will never elect someone who is not white. So that was a referendum question in 1920 in the United States. Now, as you know, Harding obviously won. He won in one of the largest landslides in U.S. presidential history. Okay? Now, the shocking underlying reality, which is explained in my book, is that Wilson is our most academically educated president. And unfortunately, even as a Christian, he held horrible racist views. Okay? He helped show Birth of a Nation, the film, in the White House. He actually wrote textbooks explaining why the Klan was rather noble in its purposes in the South. Harding, actually a Methodist, interestingly, was very opposed to that and actually made a speech in Birmingham, Alabama, in October of 1921 that shockingly confronted racial segregation in the South. I mean, totally angered the local authorities. This story is largely and completely unknown. And frankly, academics, I think, sort of seek to hide it because they champion Princeton President Woodrow Wilson, and they want to vilify the man who kind of put him to shame by coming in right after him. And so this book sort of upends the conventional wisdom surrounding U.S. presidents. That actually has a lot of ramifications for how we study and rank presidents. I'm actually one of the C-SPAN raters for presidents. There's like 200 professors who do that. But as I started studying it, I started looking at the ranking, and I'm like, it does not make sense, because Wilson actually introduced racial segregation into the federal workforce. It wasn't there until he put it in there. Harding and Coolidge took it out. And so there's a lot of surprising ironies to that. And their Christian convictions, all three of them, were very integral to this political process. And so that's not screened out of the book. I explain that, they're different backgrounds.
What did Calvin Coolidge bring to the table in comparison to those other two?
President Coolidge is probably the single best source you could ever read to understand why the United States is a Christian nation. Okay, his speeches, by the way, I work for the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. I've worked for them for about 10 years. His speeches are some of the best things you can read to actually understand how Christianity sort of built the nation and formed the convictions and even the political process that we understand. They're some of the most lucid explanations. And he was also very popular. Shockingly, there was not a 22nd Amendment in 1928. Coolidge was a very popular president. The Republicans thought he would run again, and he said, no, I'm not going to run again. Someone else can be president. This country is designed to let anyone be president. And so instead of arrogantly just saying, I'll be president forever, like certain other presidents, he decided to say, I'm stopping here, and then that allowed Hoover. And so if you look at his tombstone in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, it is almost indistinguishable from a regular public person. There are many larger stones. He was a very uniquely humble person, very Christian leader, And again, it's I think an undervalued U.S. president, and one that I think people will be very interested to kind of know more about.
So when's this book coming out?
It should be coming out in April from Lexington Books.
Okay,
So,
we're going to do that, all right? It's coming out. Look, now, we're coming to the audience right here. So what I want you to do, professors, I want you to stand up. Chase, you got a microphone? Who's got a question for Ben Voth?
Yeah, Dr. Voth, thanks a bunch. I've really appreciated this. The theme of humility came up at least twice in this, and I was very grateful for that, so thank you. I have, probably over the last year or so, sort of crystallized a point that's become really interesting to me, and the saying is this: homogeneity is mediocrity. And there's an element to what was said over here, and you elaborated on that as well. It's seeking out of different voices. When I look at Acts chapter 2, and goodness gracious, there were Medes and Persians and Ethiopians, and they all of a sudden they were all hearing the gospel in their own language, and the church that was born out of that was just God's beautiful expression on the earth. So at any rate. Homogeneity is mediocrity in terms of both how we interact and seek out different voices, whether it's doctrinally, perhaps in our church settings or in our professional settings. What steps should people be taking to sort of attenuate and lessen the homogeneity in their lives more broadly?
Yeah.
Now, hold on, Ben, you got to ask him, what is homogeneity?
I think I know what he means. It's like, okay, go ahead.
Homogeneity, so like uniformity of things. So like your homogenized milk, right? It's got the milk fat and all that stuff is all mixed. It's all, right? It's kind of one monolithic, becomes one monolithic thing.
Oh,
so,
one size fits all?
Yeah,
I don't
something
agree
like
with that.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
anyway,
So it could be, ethnically, doctrinally, sex.
Okay, Ben, answer his question. Go ahead. I got it.
Well, and
Thanks.
and again, I'm not looking to be partisan here, but to indicate that, like with professors, and I do this actually every election cycle, in 2022, in the occupation, according to the Federal Election Commission, professors, 98% of them all gave to one political party. Now, I won't tell you which one it is, you can probably guess. But that's homogeneity. And that's why, and there are many different ways that we can be homogeneous, and I agree with the premise of what you're saying. We need to strive outside of that. And this is literally what I'm saying to my academic friends as well. It's like, look, you need to get beyond the bounds of your echo chamber, where everything's sort of the same. And that's where I'm trying to encourage debate, literally in every different way. And one of the things, like, for example, that we do at SMU, we do public debates. We actually did abortion, gun control, and the governor's debate for Texas on our campus this fall. And what I'm trying to indicate to people is, like, we don't have to be scared of that. There were no fist fights at SMU. There was not even profanity. But we're, I think, misled by the nature of social media and even televised media that, like, oh, if we venture out of our homogeneic, situation, we're going to find violent conflict or an assault or something. That's really not true. And I've been doing public debates across the United States for 30 years. And the truth is, I've never seen even profanity uttered on very big, powerful topics like abortion, gun control, anything you can think of. I've had public debates about it. We have to be brave enough to go beyond our comfort zone and have conversations with people that are different than us and have different experiences and even have different opinions than us. And that has really been actually a great blessing of my life and ministry, is that debate sort of compels me to do that. And I want to try to invite as many people as I can to not be conditioned by what you're seeing and hearing on social media and on televised media, that if you do that, terrible bad things are going to happen to you. Now, and again, I can't deny that there is, canceling and things like that goes on. But we need to do what you're saying, and what I'm urging too is that to get beyond our comfort zones and have conversations with people that differ from us. We need to be rooted in Scripture and the truth, but we shouldn't be afraid to have the conversations with those that are at odds and having different.
I got to make a comment about that, but first I have a question for the audience. Laura, please stand up, please.
Okay, I'm Laura Bauer. To that question, or what you just said, I am afraid to have conversations within my own family. And, I try, but I am pretty timid But I have a question for you. Because you say we shouldn't be afraid, but people who walk around in red caps would get beat up without even saying anything in our society. My question to you is, how can, like a group, where can we have these kinds of debates? Like, where, we're doing it on social media, but like, what can we bring back? Town halls? I mean, my thing is more practical.
Yeah.
Because you're in academia, you have a setting. What about those of us that are just floaters in the world?
We get our voice out there and discuss it. Yeah.
Where can we discuss
these issues
without being harmed or hurt or in danger?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. And again, I'm still going to say, and by the way, we're going to do 3 more public debates at SMU in February and in April. And we do invite anyone in the public to come and talk. I will say at the root of your question, and again, I really think this is the heart of the gospel. I always kind of make a joke, like God didn't send us a text message or a fax. He sent us an argument in the flesh. Jesus was formed in the flesh and had conversations with us. And so I would encourage people, and this is part of where I think we're being conditioned wrongly, don't try to have these debates on social media, like Facebook and Instagram, whatever. That's not really where. Get face to face with people and just go into different groups, or even if I was talking about even at y'all's table, when I'm on the DART train, I might just start a conversation with somebody, it's a random conversation. I don't know where it's going to go, and let things kind of unfold. But I think face to face, things are actually much safer than people think. I think the media is trying to condition people to think oh, you should be very afraid. But I'm telling you, based on 30 years of doing this, I've not, and the thing that we do at SMU is it's not just the debaters debating. We have a group like this, and we ask people to stand up and talk, and I've never seen people attack each other, even in hundreds of different places, like at Ohio and here in Texas and things like that. But wherever you are with other human beings in a group, I think you should venture some questions that you're curious about. And even most communities have, partisan groups of Republican women, Democrat women, or whatever, political interest group. Go and meet with some of those groups, and and even just confess, hey, I don't agree with this group, but I'd like to hear, your perspective on that. I have to do that in order to do my job with debate, but I do try to, with every student, encourage them, be brave, in the way of doing this. One of the things, and by the way, this is something everybody in here can do. There are lots of high school groups in this Dallas area who need volunteer judges for their debates, junior high all the way to high school. And that can be a very safe way to hear different arguments about things that are going on in the world, and then you just kind of write your notes about what you think about that, and sometimes you even get to give an oral critique. But so those are some things I would recommend.
Oh, we got to wrap it up in a sense. Now, Chase, I need that other slide that has to do with the motto from SMU. Forgot, we got to get this. Now, other thing, James, you talked about that, you remember this, how do you say the word again? Homogeneity. Homogeneity. That's not what Christ and God the Father's done with us, because He's made each of us uniquely made to get your voice out with your personality, your way. And the verse he quoted, James 5:16, which ought to be your book, let your light shine before men in such a way that other people may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven. So you have a unique purpose. So you need to speak up more with not trying to homogenize everybody, one size fits all, but your argument and Uchi's argument in Nigeria. So here's a slide. I want the slide of the professor from SMU, that one that talks about the truth. There it is. Explain that to us right now.
Okay, so SMU's motto, like actually many universities in the United States, is Veritas Liberabit Vos. The first day of class at SMU, I do a campus walking tour. I take students into Dallas Hall, which is kind of the iconic center of the campus. And the bottom of the floor, the university motto is kind of impressed into the brass circle there. And I ask the students, I'm like, what does that say? And they can see Veritas Liberabit Vos. And the first thing I'm asking them is what's the English translation of that? And usually they can kind of figure out, like, hey, like truth, freedom, liberty. And I'm like, yeah, the truth will set you free. So we kind of figure that out. And then I say, who said that? And that usually stumps most SMU students, unfortunately. And
Now,
I'm
you
like,
guys know who said that?
yeah,
Who?
I mean,
Thank you very much.
yeah, Jesus said that in the 8th chapter of John. That's what I explained, okay? And so I said, University of Texas, you find that inscribed in the stone. I tell them that when I taught at Miami University, the main university building, Upham Hall, it was inscribed in the stone in English. It said, the truth will set you free. And in fact, Miami students believe, like, if you kiss somebody in that archway, you would marry them. But so that was like the foundation of the university. It's a very common motto. And so all my opening lecture at SMU, I explained, like, there is a way of your mind that will set you free. And that is what Jesus is talking about. And in the way that he is a teacher, he is ready to make your mind stronger and to set you free from really anything that's coming against you in the world. And so that's an instructional statement by Jesus in the 8th chapter of John. And it has been the historical foundation of most state and private universities in the United States.
Ben, that's all we got time for. So thank him a lot for this.
Thank you, Stan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, what we're going to do right quick, he's going to step over here, and Nucci's going to step over. He's going to sell his books and sign them for you. And I want to show our audience right here what we have going on. March 30th, we have Steve Trice coming from Oklahoma, May 25th, July 27th, September 14th, and November 30th, right here at the Hope Center, interviewing people from all walks of life, professors, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, maybe even you, which would be great to have local talent step up here and do this, which, of course, Dr. Ben Voth is. So thank you so much. And next time, which will be March, bring a buddy with you, okay? This is a buddy sport, okay? So God bless you. Thank you for joining, worldwide internet people. Respond to us, and thank you, Chase Me Films, for doing all this. We'll see you in a month and a half. God bless you. Bye.